Amen. Okay, well, it's already been mentioned about the coming election. So, it's probably, unless you've crawled under a local rock or somewhere, you'd probably realise that there is a general election about to happen. I think if I get the right, 7th of May, isn't that right? When everybody goes to their polling stations, and I think I've just put my notes on here, actually. You can tell it's been one of those days, can't you? Okay, everyone goes to the polling station, unless you do a postal vote, and you'll decide who you think might be most suitable to run the country, or the most suitable candidate for maybe a member of parliament or whatever. So, this evening, I thought we would have a look at two areas. First of all, I thought we would look at some leaders in the Bible. So they're not necessarily kings, but they're three people who are significant leaders in the Bible. And then the second section, look at qualities from a biblical perspective we should be looking for when deciding who we should vote for in this next election. Okay? So this is not a political message, but this is a message straight out of the Bible to hopefully help us in our decision making when it comes to the 7th of May. Now, some people, they may think that, well, Christians shouldn't get involved in politics. Some people think it's very important for us to get into politics, but I don't know where you stand, but this evening I think it's important to look from a biblical perspective, leadership, and to help us for this next coming week. So the first leader that I want to look at is Moses. There's no doubt that Moses was a big leader in the Bible. God chose Moses as a leader right at the beginning, right at his birth. Moses was born, and as we know, Pharaoh had ordered all the newborn boys to be killed and to be thrown in the River Nile. But his mum, who hid him, who then put him in the Nile, in his Moses basket, and he was saved. And not only was he saved, he was actually brought up by the family itself who had actually ordered the killing. So God has a bit of a sense of humour, doesn't he? A sense of, yeah, I'm going to save this guy, not only from the man who should kill him, but I'm going to actually get him to bring him up in his household. And it actually wasn't till Moses was 80 years old that God called him to be a leader. 80 years old. Now, I don't know how many people here are 80 or coming up 80 or over 80, but I very much doubt anybody in the 80s will be thinking, right, this is the start of my leadership. I think most people will be thinking, I'm ready just to sort of take things nice and slowly and nice and steady. But God called Moses at the age of 80 to lead a whole nation out into the wilderness. A nation of over, we don't know exact numbers, but if I was to say between 1 and 2 million people out of slavery and into the wilderness, I don't think I will be too wrong, at the age of 80. So, what leadership qualities did Moses have? Why did God choose Moses? Okay. First of all, he had the hand of God on his life. Exodus chapter 3. I don't have a main passage, so you'll have to excuse me. There's quite a lot of verses here. If anybody wants a copy of them after, if you don't get to write them down, please ask me and I'll give you them. Exodus chapter 3 and verse 8. So I have come down to rescue them from the land of Egypt, the land of Egyptians, and bring them up out of that land and go to the spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of Canaanites, Hittites, Ammonites, Perizzites, Hittites and Jebusites. And now the city of Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are pressing them. So now I go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So here God calls Moses to go and to Pharaoh and to lead the people out of Egypt. The second quality that Moses had, he listened and obeyed God. Exodus chapter 4, 18 to 20. Exodus chapter 4, 18 to 20. Then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Let me go back to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive." Jethro said, "Go, and I wish you well." Now the Lord had said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men are wanted to kill you are dead." So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back to Egypt. And he took his staff of God in his hand. So here Moses was called and he obeyed God and went and did exactly what God had told him to do. Number 3, he was uncompromising. He was uncompromising. Exodus chapter 10, verse 1. Exodus 4, 18. Sorry, I've been in Exodus chapter... I was right. Sorry, I've got these mixed up here. Exodus chapter 10 and verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these miraculous signs of mine amongst them, so that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians, and how I performed my signs amongst them, and that you may know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "This is what the Lord God of the Hebrews says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts to your country." Here, Moses was completely uncompromising. He said, this is what has to happen. He didn't compromise and say, well, okay, you might not have done it this time, so maybe just let half of them go, or a quarter of them. No, he wanted Pharaoh to let all his people go, but Pharaoh, as we know, hardened his heart. The fourth one, Moses was persistent. Just if we look at the same verse, Moses went to Pharaoh 10 times with the 10 plagues and continued to hound Pharaoh, saying, "Let my people go." He didn't give up after the first plague or the second plague or the third plague. He was persistent. He knew exactly what God had told him was right, and he went and persistently said, "Pharaoh, if you don't let them go, this is what is going to happen." And he didn't let anything else deter him. He went and he said, "Let my people go." The fifth one, he was humble. Exodus chapter 3, verse 6. Exodus chapter 3, verse 6. And then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Complete humility. And chapter 4 and verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow to speech and tongue." And the Lord said to him, "Who gave him his mouth? Who makes the deaf or the mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? It is not I, the Lord, that does it." So here, Moses realizes that he's not great in speech, and most people would think that Moses probably had some kind of speech impediment, and that's why he asked, he didn't want to go to Pharaoh, and that's why Aaron went with him to speak for him, because Moses wasn't very eloquent in speech. And sometimes we think, well, I can't do that because I'm not very good at this or not very good at that. Well, we should let God decide who should be leader and who isn't. So this is a guy at 80, Not only is 80, but he also has a speech impediment, and yet God wants to send him a nation of probably 2 million people out into the wilderness and look after them. So things are, in one sense, getting worse for Moses, but God says, no, you're the man for this job. And the last one here, he could delegate. Exodus chapter 18 and verse 19 to 24. Exodus chapter 18, 19 to 24. Listen now to me, I will give you some advice, and my God will be with you. You must be the people of representatives before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them the decrees and the laws and show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. In simple case, they can decide themselves that will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands you, will be able to stand the strain of all these people who will go home satisfied. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. In context to this, Moses is completely stressed out because they're out in the wilderness and everybody's coming to him with every little tiny complaint, and he's trying to sort it out for himself. Where his father-in-law comes to him and said, look, Moses, why don't you delegate these small jobs to other people and you just deal with the big stuff? And then it helps you. You can concentrate and you can listen and delegate the trivial stuff to the other people. And that's what Moses did. Moses was able to delegate. So here we have the hand of God was on his life right from the beginning, right from his birth. Even though he probably wasn't too happy at the beginning, he listened and he obeyed God and did exactly what he was told to do. He was uncompromising in what God told him to do. He was persistent, he was humble, and he could delegate. All qualities that we see here, even in his 80s and even with a speech impediment, he was all these 5, 6 different things in his qualities as a leader. The second one here we have is Gideon. Gideon, he lived at the time of the judges. Moses has died, Joshua has died, and now we come to the Israelite people in Canaan. And as you know, the story is the people, when Joshua died, go and do everything that they see is right in their own eyes. Out comes a judge because they get so bad, and the judge brings them back to God. They come back to God. Then that judge dies, and they all decide to clear off and do what everything is right in their own eyes. Again, they create another huge, great, big mess. And again, they get so depressed and so big of a mess. Another judge comes up. And here we see Gideon as one of the judges that is risen up to lead the people back to God. So what was Gideon like as a leader? Well, here we see some slightly different qualities of Moses. But here, Gideon. Okay, let's make sure we get to the book of Judges here. Okay, number 1, he doubted. Judges chapter 6, 12 to 14. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." But Sir Gideon replied, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all the wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring you up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abolished us and put us in the land of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in strength. You are to save Israel out of the Midian's hand. And am I not sending you?" So here, Gideon doubted the fact that God had called him to go and lead the people. The second thing, he knew his weaknesses. chapter 15 and verse 15 and 16. But Lord, Gideon asked, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites together. Here, Midian knew the fact that he was weak and his tribe was weak, and he recognized his weakness. The third one, he was unsure that he was hearing from God. Chapter 6, 17. Gideon replied, if now I have found favour in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. So here he doubted, he felt as though he was weak, and here he wanted to double check that he really was hearing from God. The next one, he was afraid of people. Things aren't getting too great here for Gideon, but he was afraid of people. Chapter 6, 25. That same night the Lord said to him, take your second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old, tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Ashphel pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on top of his height using the word Asher pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the men of his town, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. So here we see Gideon unsure of his hearing from God. Now he's afraid of people. And the next, he needs reassurance. Chapter 6, 36 to 40. Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and the ground is dry, then I will know that you save Israel by my hand as you said. And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day and he squeezed a fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me. Let me make one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. This time make the fleece dry and the ground covered with dew. That night God did so, only the fleece was dry, all the ground was covered with dew. Here, Gideon needed reassurance from God that this was right. This was actually God speaking. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't something in his head. He needed reassurance. But here it wasn't just one lot of reassurance. He wanted a second reassurance that this was from God. And the third one, Gideon finally made it as a man of faith. Judges chapter 7. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Herod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Marah. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their own hands. And in order that Israel may not boast against me, that their own strength has saved her, announce now to the people, anyone who trembles will fear may go back and leave Mount Gilead. So 20,000 men left, with 10,000 remaining. And as we know the story, it eventually got down to 300 men. But all these tests that Gideon did to God, wasn't angry at him. We don't read here that God was angry, but Gideon wanted to be 100% sure that God was with him. And when he knew that, when God had passed the tests, that he finally knew that God was with him, he could go in faith and defeat the whole of Midian with 300 men. As far as a worldly leader is concerned, if you said that, well, the person that we're going to vote for is very doubtful, he knows all his weaknesses, is afraid of people, is always wanting assurance from people, you probably wouldn't vote for him, would you, if you think this guy's really not very good. But here we see God intervening into Gideon's life, knowing that this man is a man of faith and can fulfill the job that God has for him. The third and final one as far as people are concerned, and this one is a leader, but we don't know that much about him, and that is Pontius Pilate. any time in reference to him in the Bible is always reference to Jesus' crucifixion and to the fact that he had allowed the people to put him to death. So, but what do we, by reading a little bit that we know about Pontius Pilate, was he like? Well, he was brutal. John chapter 18, verse 37. John chapter 18, 37. John chapter 18, verse 37. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world to testify the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Pilate asked. With this he went out again and the Jews and said, I find no basis for charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at a time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? They shouted back, no, not him, give us Barabbas. Now Barabbas had taken part in a rebellion. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him in his face. Here, Pilate, even though he could find nothing wrong, still decided to beat Jesus and get him flogged. And Pilate lived at a time where crucifixion was common, and Pilate decided to be a brutal man. And Pilate, who was governor at the time, used crucifixion, and he used his power to crucify him. He really ruled with an iron rod. You get out of line, and you're going to end up on a cross. He was a brutal man, even to a man here, Jesus, who he sees innocent, decides, well, we'll get him flogged and then we'll decide what we're going to do with him later on. Here, he is a brutal man as far as punishment of his people was concerned. Number 2, he did have weaknesses. John chapter 19. As soon as the chief priests and their, and this is starting at verse 6. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, Crucify, crucify. But Pilate answered, You take him and crucify me. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. But Pilate answered, You take him and crucify me. The Jews insisted, We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. Here, Pilate was afraid of Jesus. He was afraid of what was going to happen and what decisions he was going to make. He was in charge, but he gave in to the crowd to put him to death. He said, I have nothing else to do with this guy. You go and you crucify him. And as we know, and as we saw on Good Friday, Pilate washed his hands and said, I am innocent of this man's blood. Even though he knew Jesus was completely innocent, the pressure of the crowd meant that he bowed down to their pressure and released Jesus to them. But he was still fearful because Pilate knew Jesus was who he said he was. Now we know for prophecy to come true, he had to hand them over, but still Pilate was scared and he wasn't prepared to make a stand knowing that Jesus was really who he did say he was and gave it power to the people. And you know, that's not always right. It's not always a good thing to go with what the masses say. Sometimes you might not be very popular, but it's not always because everybody thinks it should happen that it should happen. John chapter 19, 10 to 13. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Do you not realize I have power to either free you or crucify you? Jesus answered, You have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews just kept on shouting, If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. When Pilate heard this, he was brought Jesus out, sat down on the judgment and place known as the stone pavement. It was a day of preparation, Passover week, about the 6th hour. Here is your king, Pilate said, the king of the Jews. Here he was handed over and wanted nothing to do with the crucifixion of Jesus. So here we have three leaders. Moses, who led nearly 2 million people out. We have Gideon, who brought people back to God as a judge. And thirdly, we have Pilate as a leader who led with an iron rod and gave nobody and was quite happy to send people out to be crucified, but he still knew that Jesus was who he said he was. So, our second session, how are we going to pick a leader on the 7th of May? Now, having looked at these qualities of these three leaders, I've got a few here things together. Not all of them are directly from the leaders that we've looked at, but some of them are from passages in the Bible, which I think we should look at and which should take into account when we are voting on the 7th of May. So, who are we to vote for? What should we look for in a leader on the 7th of May? Or preferably you want to look for it before the 7th of May, otherwise it wouldn't give you much time to read. The booklet that has been mentioned already is very good. I have had a couple of looks at that. Please take one. I know the Christian Institute have already produced one as well, and I've seen that on the internet, and that is very good. So there are plenty of resources to look at and to read to help you decide who you're going to vote for on the 7th of May. So, the first one here, biblical principles for a leader. Number one I have here is morals. And I want to look here at Moses. Moses, when the people grumbled, always sought the Lord. Here we are, Exodus chapter 17. Exodus chapter 17, starting at verse 1. The whole of Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, travelling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarrelled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt, to make us, our children, and our livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." So here, Moses in his predicament, the people are thirsty, they are hungry, and they keep moaning. What's the first thing that Moses do? He inquires of the Lord. Now, our leaders may not be necessarily Christians. They may not recognize as a God. But if we are to pick leaders who do not keep to a moral stand of the Bible, there are people out there, and there are many people that may not be religious, but they do have still a moral stand of what is right and wrong. And here we've only seen that even recently in our leadership of the allowing of gay marriage, and where it's going to continue, who knows? There are people who are wanting to relax the laws on abortion, relax the laws on euthanasia, and all these we know from a biblical perspective are completely wrong. And if we go down a moral decline of allowing things that God knows to be wrong, we will end up right like Gideon did in the book of the Judges, where everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and they ended up actually getting so bad that they did cry out to the Lord because things had got so bad. And if we continue down that route, the same is going to be happening here in the UK. So it is vitally important that even though the person, the leader, is not a Christian, but their moral stand on biblical morals, I think, is a very important one for us to consider. Okay, the second one here is Gideon. Judges 6. Judges chapter 6 and verse 29. They asked each other, who did this? When they carefully investigated, they were told, oh yes, that's right. I'll forget about the verse because I've missed out some of it. Here, Gideon was asked by God to destroy the altar of Baal. Here they'd gone away from God and they'd set up an altar to Baal and to other gods, and God said to Gideon, you go and you destroy it and knock it down. We are no longer having people worshipping other gods, they are worshipping us. And Gideon obeyed God and he destroyed the altar to other gods. Here is another instance where Gideon, as a leader, realised that if we don't stay to God, our morals will just go down, and again, eventually, people will cry out to God because things have got so bad. I was only reading the other day the Christian Institute, the use of even sex education within primary schools. Now they're trying to get even 5 and 6-year-olds to be thinking about homosexual relations, etc., etc. And I think for this moral downturn that we are living can only be detrimental to our country. We need to keep to biblical morals within our stand when we are thinking about voting for a candidate for our country. The second I have here is the poor. How does the candidate think of the poor? Proverbs 22:16. Whoever oppresses the poor to increase his own wealth or give to the riches will only come to poverty. There's some great lines here in Proverbs. And apparently Eddie Stobbart, old Eddie Stobbart, when he's running his business, always read 3 Proverbs every single day. And he ran his business based on the book of Proverbs. He ran all his wagons were clean because Proverbs says that you should look after what you have. And that's how he ran his business, is right on biblical principles of honouring God in everything that he did. But here, what does our candidate think of the poor? Are his principles and are his ideas for the country there to help the poor, or is it just there to help the rich get richer and we don't care about the poor? Something when we are voting for a candidate we need to think about is, what does our candidate think about the poor? Proverbs 22:16. Whoever oppresses the poor to increase his own wealth or give to the rich will only come to poverty. The third one, immigration. What does the Bible say about immigration? Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33. Okay, that's not right because there isn't a 33 in Leviticus. Here we are. Anyway, I've got it here. When an alien lives with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the alien as one of native born, and you shall love him as yourself. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Now, before you go out and think, Paul thinks we should have an open door to immigration, this is the Bible verse, okay? That is not true. I'm not saying that we should have an open policy for immigration at all. But what we should do is, when we're looking at as a candidate, is what is their attitude to people from foreign lands that already live in our country. Now, I'd say most of the people, most of the candidates, but I would say not all of them, but most of the people that are up are probably okay with the people who already live here. But we need to think about it. Think about, what is their attitude towards people? Do they want to stick them all on a boat and get rid of them all? Or are they saying, no, these people are here for genuine reasons. These people are here working, and these people deserve our respect for us. And here God has actually put this in the Bible where it says, weren't you, and he said this to the Israelite people, that you were foreigners in a land when I brought you out of Egypt. So when people come to you, you should respect them because you were looked after as a foreigner, as millions of people as a foreigner in the land that I took you from. So we're just looking at a little bit of what that is. I know that there's loads of controversy about people, and when I was coming here, I was having a little bit of think about this issue of immigration. And a lot of time you see people on the internet say, oh no, send them all home because they're taking all our jobs. Well, I spent 4 years delivering chemicals to a lot of farmers around Hesketh Bank. And Hesketh Bank is an area, a big area for vegetables, and some things can be done by machine, but a lot of the vegetable collecting work is done manually. And I would go to many a farmer and he said, if a local came here, I would rather employ him. But we've got to the stage now where nobody wants to do a menial job. He said, when the first day of term finished for the summer, up and down this road, there would be children coming and going at sort of 15, 16, wanting some summer work to be able to go and take some money on the holiday. He said, now I see nobody wants to do a menial work. So I have to employ Lithuanians and people from Poland. And he said they are hard-working, their morals and their work standard are good, and they have a good work ethic. So what do? Do I just leave my crops, or do I employ people who are prepared to come and to work? And that was a good point, really, that it's okay saying they're taking our jobs, but would you do the jobs that some of these guys are prepared to do? They're prepared to be on their hands and knees and weeding organic vegetables, and they'll do it with all the gusto and work ethic they can because it's a job for them. So I know there are ones that come and they sort of just take our money and sponge off the state, etc., etc. But when we are looking for somebody to lead us, what is their view on people who live in our land? And that really is all I have there. It's not an exhaustive list. And as I've been looking at this, it just piled and piled and piled and piled up of things that we can look at. So please don't think that, I've just condensed it. I've spent all week doing this and condensed it. I haven't. But these are just areas, as I have looked at it, that I think might be helpful, that when we are picking a leader, they may not be a Christian, but what values do they stand for, and what values may they bring to our country? Now, I know in the magazine that Evangelical Alliance have looked, and they've said, if you want to agree with absolutely everything, you'll never find a candidate. If you want someone to agree with everything, stand yourself. And then everything that you stand for will be on the list. But, as we're looking, we can make a list of the different things and pick one that is most and as closest as we can get to biblical values that we've looked at this evening. So thank you very much for that.